Now, allow me to introduce the dedicated York International team. First, we have Eugene Lee, who is the International Student Experience Coordinator, overseeing the Orientation and Transition portfolio. As previously mentioned, I am Tirth, and joining me are my colleagues Anika and Zang. By the end of this webinar, you should have a better grasp about what to expect at the border with customs, such as the general process and how to navigate it more confidently. We'll also talk more about the important documents you should have ready with you. And finally, we'll be going over a few possible questions you might be asked by the Canadian Customs Officer. Our agenda for the day includes a quick introduction to our international student advisors and immigration specialists who will be heading the presentation on everything you need to know about arriving in Canada, after which we'll be having a question and answer session to address any concerns that you may have, and then we'll be wrapping it up with a few upcoming webinars and events that you folks can attend. Okay. On that note, I'll be handing it over to Gilbert, who is one of our immigration specialists here at York International, and he'll get us started with the presentation. The floor is yours, Gilbert.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're super excited to have you join this webinar today. So I'm going to spend the next hour or so talking about how to better prepare yourself to arrive in Canada. So my name is Gilbert Tutime, and I'm one of the international students and immigration specialist at York International. I am licensed regulated Canadian immigration consultant, ICIC. So this is a designation for persons who are sort of licensed to give immigration advice in Canada. And at York International, we have advisors here who have different designations. For example, as you can see, my colleague there, Mayuri, she's an immigration lawyer too as well. So all of us are licensed to give immigration advice on a variety of issues such as study permits, temporary residence visas, working on or off campus co-op work permit, and also postgraduate work permit, and in some scope permanent residency as well. So just some important reminders. Only a licensed person should or can give immigration advice. Why is this important? Immigration law is very complex, and each person's situation is sort of unique. So please always seek advice or information from authorized sources, such as an immigration lawyer or an immigration consultant. We all know that we have friends and families who have gone through some immigration process before and are sort of eager to share their experiences and opinions or personal experiences with us. But just be careful about how that information is being given to you and how it's always being shared, right? So just so you know, this presentation is current as of today. Immigration rules are always changing, so please always be prepared to check Canada's website for most up-to-date information. And also, please be aware of unauthorized individuals trying to gain access to your personal or financial information. If you ever receive any communication by phone, email, text from someone who says they're from the immigration department or other government departments, such as, let's say, the Department of Justice, and demanding that you make payment or else you'll be arrested, deported, or anything like that, it's likely a scam, it's fake. So don't provide any information to any of those folks. All right. So this is our advising, immigration advising schedule. So this is how you're going to get in contact with us. Please note that we do not act as legal representative for students, but we are very happy to help provide guidance and information. And we'll be sharing information as to how you can get in contact with us on the next slide. We do provide regular presentation focused webinars on topics like pathways to permanent residence and also study permit extensions applications. We want to help make immigration matters relatively very easy for you to understand so that you can focus on what's more important, especially your education. So as a York University student, you have access to in-person one-on-one advising by booked appointment for topics where we require more times to discuss. We usually have those on Mondays and Thursdays at certain times, and it's Eastern Standard Time. It's an in-person appointment, but if you do require Zoom appointment, we'll make those available to us as well. We also have the virtual drop-in. No appointment is required, just for quick questions. So during drop-ins, you can ask any questions, a whole range of questions from study permit, work authorizations, anything like that too as well. And then we have the immigration workroom, which is typically on every Fridays from 1 p.m. This is also an in-person session where you have the opportunity to work on any type of immigration application in real time, and support from an international student advisor too as well. Please remember to bring your laptop or any application materials with you during the immigration workroom. All right, so this is an important page. You can take screenshot of that, or you can scan the QR code. It will take you to all the immigration sessions that we host and how you can get a hold of us. You can scan that, so I'll leave that for a second there as well. All right, so let's jump into the fun part. So I'm going to take you through some important documents, and hopefully you should have received this by this point. The first one is the letter of introduction, aka port of entry letter. So this is a document sent from the visa office to confirm approval of a study permit or a work permit. When you arrive in Canada, you have to present this letter at the point of entry. So the letter of introduction. You should have also received a temporary resident visa. This authorizes your entry into Canada. So applicants from non-visa requiring countries will receive an electronic travel authorization, ETA, for short approval. And this is linked to your passport. And also you find the ETA number or validity in your letter of introduction. Sometimes you get multiple entry, or sometimes you get single entry depending on your validity period of your passport. All right. So based on the examination at the point of entry, you are then going to be issued a study permit, which allows you to study in Canada. Also, important reminder, we highly recommend that you hold off booking a ticket before you travel to Canada, because processing time for applications sometimes are fast, sometimes they're slow, depending on the region or country that you're coming from or applying from. So please wait for that process to be done before you book any tickets. All right. Okay, so what documents do you carry with you? So the following documents are very important and readily available, and I'm going to point out where you can get them. Your passport, you should already have those. Do not place them in your checked luggages, because you're going through Canadian customs and you wouldn't have access to your checked luggage, right? So your passport should be on you, your letter of introduction, which is your AKA port of entry letter, your temporary residence visa, TRV, or electronic travel authorization, your York University offer of acceptance letter or proof of enrollment if you've already begun your studies remotely. And also, to be able to get your letter of acceptance, you can download that under My File, and the confirmation of enrollment tool can be downloaded to there as well, and the link should be provided in the chat. All right. So the other thing too that you have to be mindful of is proof that you have enough money to support yourself during your stay in Canada. So if you used a GIC, for example, you need to provide that to us as well, right? If you have bank statements that you provided with your application, you need to include all of that to us as well, right? So these documents you've already submitted to support your original application when you applied for your study permit. So in some cases, there were longer processing timelines. So some financial documents might be a little bit outdated. So it would be advisable to get up-to-date copies of from your financial institution. Make sure it's clear, legible, print out on bank statement. If you have sponsorship letters or scholarship letters, have that too as well. If you already prepaid your tuition, you can download and print that from your student statement account online. All right, so also valid medical results if you need one, right? So not everyone needs one, but if you need one, make sure you have a copy on you. Sometimes it's called e-medical form or a tracking sheet, depending on the country in which you applied for. The actual results are actually sent to IRCC, so you wouldn't have the actual results, but you will just have, proof that you've already done medicals, and medicals are usually valid for 1 year. So address, where you be staying, and important phone numbers. So whether you be living on campus or off campus, you'll be probably asked to fill out a custom declaration form. So if you have a contact of someone picking you up, please make sure that you have their phone numbers, just in case the examination takes longer than expected. And the next few documents are sort of optional. So travel health insurance to cover your trip to Canada, that's optional. Medical immunization record, optional too as well. And some cash in Canadian dollars, that's optional. You don't need to have those on you. So just a couple of reminders here. It's good to have this document both in paper or digital format, right? So having them on paper will allow you to have them readily accessible. We know that a lot of you have these documents on your cell phone, but anything could happen, right? You could run out of, battery. You might have connection issues in case the Wi-Fi is not strong. So having both options will enable you to be covered just in case. Also, make sure you have access to your passport, York, and MyFile, especially for new incoming students. These are the two important websites. In case anything is missing, you'll be able to log into your faculty or your program of studies, and you should be able to provide all of this to the officer. So we'll be going through a lot of this in more details in the next slide. All right. All right, so plan your luggage, right? This is always an issue for a lot of folks. So check with the airline, see what the luggage limit is. Some items are not allowed into Canada in your luggage. So there are restrictions on alcohol, tobacco, guns, food, as well as animal and plant products. So travelers cannot bring in certain prescription drugs. So always check the link to make sure that, you're okay. And also do not carry another person's bag, right? Especially if you don't know what the content is. This is a common security tip that is given to a lot of folks. So just don't do that. Also, you're allowed to carry liquid in clear containers up to a certain limit, so 100 ml in carry-on luggage. So keep that in mind. Also, you can add an address tag to each of your piece of luggages with your name and address in your destination in Canada. So keep all your important documentation, medication, or expensive items such as cameras, jewelry, laptops, phone, credit cards, or cash within your carry-on luggage rather than pack them in your checked luggage, right? So remember, do not finalize your travel plans until you've received your letter of introduction in your temporary residence visa or your ETA, right? Okay, so let's talk about roles of IRCC and also CBSA, right? So Canadian immigration has two branches, and IRCC stands for Immigration, Refugee, Citizenship Canada. So they are responsible for developing immigration programs, immigration policies, processing permanent and temporary residence application, insurance of certain documents and visas and permits. And also, when you submit your application, it was an IRCC officer that reviewed the application and rendered a decision on that application. On the other hand, we have a second part. So when you arrive in Canada, you'll be meeting with a CBSA officer. So the CBSA stands for Canada Border Services Agency. and they are responsible for carrying out enforcement functions, conducting entry examination, conducting investigations of those that believed to be inadmissible to Canada, and also preparing case for presentation at the Immigration and Refugee Board, the IRB, and also sometimes detaining or removing individuals from Canada if they do not meet the entry requirement. So a CBS officer would make the final decision as to whether or not you qualify to enter Canada. So just keep that in mind. All right. So a few things that you should expect on your arrival to Canada. So typically during the peak travel season, you may expect longer border processing wait times in order to complete all necessary paperwork. So just keep that in mind too as well. All passengers have to complete entry examination at customs before proceeding to baggage claim areas. We will talk about this, so please make sure you have those important. We already talked about this, so about the important documents that you need to carry with you and not in your checked luggages too as well. So a border officer would direct you to where you need to go to complete your study permit application. So depending on some airport or the airport in which you decide to travel, either Toronto or through Vancouver, wherever your first point of entry into Canada would be, some airport have a special processing area for international students arriving in Canada. So please watch out for the signage so that when you're directing you to those designated areas, you know where you're going. At the entry examination, you'll be asked basic questions, right? About your identity, your citizenship, your residency, your purpose of entry, your length of stay, right? You also could also be asked more in-depth questions about your eligibility, your admissibility, right? And once the examination is concluded, that's when, you know, the study permit is issued to you at the conclusion of the entry examination, right? So let's talk about some basic questions and also some in-depth questions so that you are aware of what that could look like. Okay, so there are some things that we expect you to know and answer. So for example, right, your identity, right? What's your name? If you don't know your name, that's a problem, right? Citizenship, what's your citizenship? Where are you from, right? Your residency, where do you reside? There's some folks who have citizenship in a country and have residency in a different country, right? So you should be able to explain both of them. Your intention, what's your purpose of your trip to Canada, right? Why are you here? I'm here to study. What program are you in? You should be able to answer that, right? Your length of stay, how long do you intend to stay in Canada? So some of you would be issued a 1-year program, a 4-year program, a 3-year program. So if your program starts in 2025, how long are you in Canada for? I'm here from 2025 to 2027 or to 2028. You should be able to answer that too as well. Another key thing I want to point out is employment. Do you intend to take or seek employment whilst in Canada, right? So eligible students are allowed to work on campus and off campus or participate in co-op or internship while studying at a designated learning institution, a DLI institution. So at York, you don't have co-op in your first year. You can only work before you cannot work before you've started your program, right? So for example, if you arrive 2 or 3 weeks early and your program starts, let's say January 6, 2025, you cannot start working until you've actually begun your program. So just keep those in mind. Now, if the primary examination is usually straightforward, if you are able to answer all these questions and everything is fine, then, you know, you're fine, then your study permit will be issued to you. If there's more in-depth questions and the officer is not okay with how you answer the question, that's when you move to secondary examination. Typically, that will apply to international students, right? So international students entering for the first time are automatically referred to secondary examination. So the officers at the secondary examination will ask you more in-depth questions that are not part of a primary examination to determine your eligibility. You know, the officer would make an assessment on your admissibility to Canada on medical or criminal or security grounds in case any additional concerns comes to light too as well. If you're able to pass all the secondary examination, then your study permit is issued to you at the conclusion of your secondary examination. All right. So let's go through some tips on your interaction with CBSA, how to conduct yourself. So a couple of tips here, all right? It's always in your best interest to answer questions truthfully, right? There's something called misrepresentation, and that could, mean either giving false information or omitting certain information that could be serious immigration offense, and that could be subject to serious fines depending on how the officer is looking at that, right? So just be careful about that. So if you're using an agent or a family member who did your application for you, before you travel, it's always a good time to get a copy of that application, especially if you didn't do it yourself, so that you can familiarize yourself with the information on there. The officer sees you as the client, and you are expected to know what is in your application. So if you use the lawyer or an immigration consultant or an agent, you need to know what they put in your application, right? Because that agent, that consultant, that lawyer is representing you, and you are the client. So you guys are all the same. That's the way the officer looks at it, right? So, for example, what's your program? What's the expected duration of your program? Your tuition fees, things like that, right? You would have given this information to your agent or your consultant or your lawyer to include that with your application, right? Only answer questions that you are asked and to the point, right? If you don't know what that is, that's fine. Every time I travel and I'm at a CBSA or a border control office, of course I'm nervous, right? You're at the airport, it's expected, some people tend to talk too much, and that's okay, right? But just remember, when you're at the airport with a CBSA officer, just remember that the officers are very busy. They're going through a lot of passengers. You're going to see a long lineup sometimes, right? And they just want to get you, go straight to the point, answer the question, and then move on to the next person, right? So just keep that in mind, right? If you don't know the answer or you're not unsure, say, I think, or I'm not sure. So the officer knows that you're trying to give your best educated guess, right? Instead of trying to, make things up, right? If you didn't understand the question and you didn't hear the questions properly, you can always ask the officer to repeat themselves or rephrase, right? Sometimes, especially depending on the country in which you're coming from, you might be tired after a long flight. You just need a minute or two to adjust because of the time difference, your jet lag, So have your documents readily accessible to help streamline the examination process, right? We've already talked about this. Having the information in paper format or having it electronically, whatever suits you best, right? And the last thing I'll point out, just as a general tip, is that be respectful and cordial, right? Some officers might be friendly, some of them might be strict. So we don't know which officer you're going to run into, right? So just be respectful and polite, right? Some officers probably, are already having a bad day. You don't know that, right? So, or some are just trying to get their job done. So just gauge the atmosphere and just be ready for that, right? All right. So some of the things that I want you to keep in mind when they issue you your study permit, right? So finally, you've answered everything correctly. You've gone through primary examination, you've gone through secondary examination. The officer would issue you your study permit. Before you leave the airport, there are a few things that you need to check, right? So on the top section of your study permit contains your personal details, including your name, your date of birth, your country of birth, your country of citizenship, your passport, etc., right? It's possible for an IRCC officer to make mistakes, and guess what? We're all not perfect, so they're not perfect either, right? So the onus is on you to ensure that that information on there is correct, right? So if you catch any mistakes, let the officer know right away, okay? So they're going to print out their study permit, they're going to issue it to you. I know there's a long lineup behind you, take a few seconds, right away. You just look, take a few glance, right? Because once you've left the airport, guess what? It's going to take you time. It's going to cost you money to make any amendment on your study permit, right? So just keep all of that in mind, right? The other thing too is that the second thing is the duration of your study permit. So there's no right or wrong answer, right? For example, usually study permits are usually valid until the end of your program plus 90 days or until your passport expires. So CBSA officers would have the discretion to determine the length of your authorized stay. So on the bottom of your study permit, there are conditions listed on the document that allows you to either work, on campus or off campus if you're eligible, right? So you need to make sure that it's listed there. So it's going to be conditions, right? May accept employment on or off campus, meeting eligibility requirement up to subject to regulation 186 F or V, depending on which the officer includes in there too as well. And if the officer wants to add any additional information, it's going to be under the remarks or observations period. So take a quick glance, look at it. Remember, they're very busy, right? So you have to be on top of this, right? So take a few seconds, read the conditions, because I've already told you what to expect, right? You've already seen the sample. You know what to look for. So take this time, look at the sample study permit that I provided you. You're going to see what it looks like. Take a quick glance at it, make sure everything is correct before you walk out of that airport. All right. Okay. So let's talk about, before I jump in here, one thing I wanted to mention is that there's a method and there's some tools that would help remind you of certain important dates and events. So for example, once your study permit is issued to you, you're gonna know what your expiration date is, right? So track that. Some people use Gmail calendars, some people use a paper agenda, or some people write a sticky note and stick it to their fridge, or you can ask your mom or your dad to remind you when your study permit is gonna be. Some people tattoo it on their hands. Don't do that. Some things that you need to understand is that you want to record those study permit expiration dates, visa expiration date, passport expiration date, right? Your study permit and immigration documents can only be issued up to the expiration date of your passport, right? So once you know when those things are expiring, we also recommend that you start preparing 3 months in advance to start extending these documents, right? So one thing you need to know is renew your study permit before it expires so that you have something called maintained status or implied status whilst your application is being processed, right? You can continue studying and working in this case because you have those maintained implied status, right? You have 90 days to restore your status. So let's say for some bad reason, you're not able to extend your study permit and you're out of status, Canada has given you 90 days to restore your status if your study permit has expired, right? So if you didn't apply for a study permit for expired, but this is what's going to happen. You cannot work, you cannot study until your study permit has been approved and has arrived if you're within the 90 days restoration. To avoid all of that, you want to extend your study permit before it expires. Okay, all right. So let's dive into maintaining full-time status at York University and what that means. Okay, now you have your study permit. Everything is good to go. You're in the country, you've settled into residence, you are now an international student, you started your program of study. It's important to maintain full-time status if you wish to A, work on campus or off campus whilst you study, right? And also, the second part is there's something called postgraduate work permit. A PGWP is an open work permit that allows international students to remain and work in Canada after completing their studies. So work experience that you obtain through PGWP may help support your application for permanent residence in Canada. Whilst it is possible to be part-time and be compliant with your study permit conditions, always come and speak to one of us. We're international student advisors. Come and speak to us before you jump to any part-time status so that you can make an informed decision as to whether this is the best option for you or not, all right? So to be considered full-time, you have to be enrolled in a minimum of 9 credits in a fall semester, and the fall semester is typically from September to December, and 9 credits in the winter semester, which is from January to April, right? Sometimes you might have year-long credits. So year-long credits are, let me give you an example, maybe 6 credits or 9 credits. So if you get a year-long credit, which is 6 credits, you're gonna divide that into 2. So which means 3 credits go to the fall and 3 credits go to the winter term, right? So if I registered in, let's say, 6 credits for the fall and I have a year-long credit of 6 credits, and I take 3 from the year-long credits and add it to the fall and 3 credits to the winter, I'm still full-time, right? Because I've divided that into 2 and I've still maintained full-time for the fall and in the winter semester. The summer term is optional. Some people take summer courses because they want to finish the program on time. That's okay. You can take part-time course load, you can take full-time course load, or you can work full-time hours. There's no restriction to how many hours you can work during the summer term, right? So just so you know. Now, I have a quick quiz for you. I'm going to launch it on the Zoom platform, and I want to see if you guys were paying attention, right? So scenario A would be, I have 6 credits in the fall and 12 credits in the winter. Which one is correct? Scenario B, I have 9 credits, 4 credits, and 3 winter credits. In scenario C, I have 9 fall credits, 9 winter credits, and 3 summer credits. So what's the correct answer? So let me just give it a few seconds. I see a lot of folks are already completing the poll. So okay, I think we have everyone now. So if you chose option number C, which is scenario C, that's the correct answer, right? So as you can see in scenario A, students are part-time in the fall and full-time in the winter. So which means that, that's not, even though they're full-time in the fall, they're not full-time in the winter. That makes them ineligible to have work authorization and also apply for postgraduate work permit. Scenario B, student is registered in 6 credits in the fall, which is part-time, and 3 credits in the winter, which is also part-time. So that's incorrect. So that's not full-time status. And when you look at scenario C, the student is registered in 9 credits in the fall, which is full-time, and 9 credits in the winter, which is also full-time. Summer, as I mentioned, is optional and it's not counted. It was just there to throw you off. So if you answer that, thank you. All right. So academic breaks, right? So there's something called a scheduled break or academic break, depending on how you look at it. So it's a period that is common to all students in your program, and you're not required to enroll. So as I mentioned, for example, a winter closure, like during the winter break or summer break for most undergraduate students, and in reading week for School of Continuing Studies, if you're in the School of Continuing Studies, the break between your courses, it's an academic break, but you have to be careful. Sometimes you have a program that is running throughout, so you always want to check with us to make sure that you're being compliant with your study permit conditions. So during an academic break, you may be enrolled part-time, full-time, or not at all, and it wouldn't impact your study permit or your PGWP application. All right. So let's talk about working on campus and off campus. So those of you who might be interested in working, this is what you need to know. So if your study permit has the condition, which I talked about, that allows you to work, you just have to go to Service Canada and apply for a social insurance number, either in person or online. It's a 9-digit number that you have to give to your employer. And this will allow you to work in Canada. It's not an immigration document. It's just for payroll and taxation purposes. If you're a full-time student before and after the break, you have a work authorization. So let's talk briefly. On campus, you have a valid study permit, you have a social insurance number, study permit conditions allows you to, and you're full-time in the fall and winter, except in your final semester, you have work authorization to study on campus. There's no limit to how many hours you can work on campus, right? So once your work authorization ends and you've completed your program, you need to stop working on campus, right? Regardless of the expiration date of your study permit. Now, off campus, the same conditions apply. The only difference is that you still need to be enrolled at a DLI institution. Your program has to be more than 6 months or lead to a degree, diploma, or certificate. You cannot work more than the authorized hours, so which means 24 hours a week, right? So in regular academic sessions, so the fall and winter semester. You can also work full-time during academic break. So for example, reading week, winter closure, especially if you're full-time before and after the break. All right. So let's talk briefly about PGWP. So this is way down the road, right? So just so you're aware, a PGWP is an open work permit that allows international students to remain and work in Canada after completing their studies. And there are certain conditions that apply depending on the program. So there are some folks who are with the School of Continuing Studies. You have to have something called a zip code attached to your program. That will determine if you're going to be eligible for PGWP or not. So it's important that you're checking that. To be eligible, you have to have completed the program. The program has to be an academic, vocational, professional training program, eligible at the DLI institution, which York University is part of. And also you have to maintain full-time status throughout the duration of your academic session of your program, all right? If you take a leave of absence, there's going to be some cases where, you can be registered in the fall or in the winter courses, and you have to take an authorized leave of absence. Come and speak to us, right? We don't have a leave of absence policy, but we can write a letter to say it was authorized by the institution. And also, if you're not able to enroll full-time due to labor disruptions or strike, for example, come and speak to us, right? So you have to apply for the PGWP within 180 days of receiving your final grades. However, if you're applying from inside Canada, you should apply before your study permit becomes invalid. So first or expiry after 90 days of receiving your final grades. So that's all I have for you for now. We'll get to the questions later on, and I'll answer some of the Q&A that you guys have. So thank you for paying attention.
Hey, thank you very much, Gilbert, for your presentation on arriving in Canada. I know this was a lot of information for you folks, but I just hope that you were able to have a rough idea of what to expect when you first arrive at the Canadian border and the different kinds of documents you need to be carrying with you, as well as the different type of questions that you can anticipate from these officers. And as Gilbert mentioned, we will now be opening the floor to any questions that you folks may have. Please use the Q&A feature to submit your questions, and Gilbert will be addressing them accordingly. And for those of you who are using a different device, because the Q&A button varies for different devices, you can click the three dots or the more button and access the Q&A feature accordingly from there. Okay, so I actually do see a few questions in the Q&A. And one of the students is mentioning that I have got 2 scholarships worth 9,500, but I have not received any scholarship letters. Where can I get these letters?
So this is typically, so if you have any scholarship, it would be indicated on your visa acceptance letter, and that's sufficient enough. You don't need to have a separate letter to indicate that you have scholarship. It would be indicated on your LOA, which is your letter of acceptance. And you can write in your letter of explanation, just highlighting that, hey, you've received a scholarship of 5,000, or depending on the amount that your faculty is giving you, you can indicate it and highlight that as part of your proof of funds. Remember, when you're demonstrating proof of funds, you don't want to use the 5,000, which is just an example amount that I'm using, as the whole basis of funding your education, right? Those are supplementary to your proof of funds. So just to be clear.
Okay, thank you very much, Gilbert. I hope this answers the student's question. And we do have another question that mentions, I'm starting my BSc on a CS program in January 2025. Will my first summer term be considered as a regularly scheduled break where I can study part-time without violating my study permit rules, or will it be considered as a regular academic term where I have to maintain my full-time status?
That's a very great question, and thanks for bringing that up. But just to be quick, we do have virtual immigration sessions, so you can come and we can talk about that in detail. But just to give you a brief answer, summer is your first term, right? So you cannot take that as a scheduled break. You have to be enrolled full time. But you would have work authorization where you can work, 24 hours a week, but it's your first term. But we can talk more about that throughout the virtual immigration session. So I encourage you to join one of those sessions.
Thank you for that. And the link for the next virtual drop-in, which is tomorrow, has been placed in the chat if you'd like to join the session tomorrow. And another question we have, I guess this is more of a follow-on to the first question. It says that my scholarship is on the offer letter, but not the letter of acceptance, sorry.
Yeah, so you can merge those two documents, right? And if you haven't started your application yet, so you're gonna have sessions under the client's information or the actually the LOA field. You can merge all those letters as one PDF and include that, and that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, sounds good. Another quick reminder to everyone, please continue on asking your questions using the Q&A feature. It's an incredible opportunity. We have Gilbert over here, who is a licensed immigration specialist, and feel free to take advantage of his presence in this webinar right now.
Okay. Whilst we are waiting, I know we've received some questions in the past where students indicated when is the best time to travel to Canada. There's no set time frame for you to travel to Canada before your studies begin, but you should just arrive to give yourself a reasonable amount of time to prepare before you start studying, right? Remember, you're not authorized to work on or off campus until you've begun your studies in Canada.
Okay. Keeping in the theme of previous questions we've got at previous webinars, we actually do have a few more questions that students have asked previously. And I think these questions will give the students more of an insight on what to expect. And to start us off, the first question that I have for you is, do I need to get a new PAL letter in case I need to defer my application?
That's a great question. Yes. So in case your study permit has been delayed for some reason and you need to defer or you cannot start, request for a deferral. And then what happens is that you're going to be issued an updated LOA to show your start date has changed. If your study permit is still being processed, you're going to submit a web form to IRCC to let them know you're not starting in January anymore. You've been deferred to the May intake or the September intake, depending on the availability of the program.
Okay. A link to deferral of admissions has also been placed in the chat if you'd like to refer to that link. And this is more of a follow-on once again to the very first question that we asked. And the question says, the correction says that the second question that you referred to was the fact that the summer term is going to be their second term and not the first term.
So that's fine. So as I mentioned through the presentation, the summer is considered a scheduled break for majority of our programs. And you can work more than 24 hours a week. You don't have to enroll in courses. You can enroll in courses, it's up to you. So that's an option. I'll leave that up to you to decide.
Yeah. We have another question which says that, may I know what topics are generally avoided in conversations which might be considered disrespectful in Canada so that I can avoid these topics at the borders?
That's a great question, but I don't think I can give you a definite scenario on that. You would know, just be cordial and respectful, right? You would know what the tone is once you get to the CPSO officer, right? So if they ask you a question, just answer the question, right? If they are just having conversation with you or about, where you're coming from, if it's a Sun City, what happens, they're engaging in those conversations, then you know what the parameters are because they've opened up the room for more conversation. So you'll be able to tell based on the interaction you're having with the CPSO officer. Sometimes, they'll compliment you or they'll look at something and you're like, oh, this is nice. Where did you get that from, right? They've opened the room to those conversations. What I'm saying is just answer the question that you've been asked and leave it at that. There's no need to go on and off about things that doesn't concern, the reason why you're there.
Thank you very much. Another question we have is, my program begins on 6th January 2025, but I have not received my visa. Can I defer my application?
Yes, so the deferral link was shared with you. Check the deadline for the deferral. If you feel like you're not going to get your visa by January 6th, or, typically we add plus 1 or 2 weeks, if you're not going to start, especially if your visa has been approved already and you're not going to start by January, the second week of classes, it's better to defer and start in the next term so that you don't miss a lot of, materials that are being covered in the classroom, right? So you'll be able to tell based on when you've already submitted. If you're just submitting your study permit application right now, 100% you need to defer, right? Because the processing timeline that we've seen is about 4 weeks, depending on the country in which you're coming from. So please take note of that.
Another question we have is, my passport will be expiring before the completion of my studies, and I cannot apply for a new one yet. That will be valid until the end of my program. Is it possible that I will be asked about this at the Canadian border?
Yes, but the good thing is that you'll still be issued your study permit. They're only going to issue you to the validity of your passport. Once you arrive in Canada, you can come see us. We'll walk you through the process of how to extend your study permit. During the presentation, I mentioned that you need to extend at least 3 months before the expiration date of your study permit. So if you know your study permit is going to expire soon and you need to start extending it 3 months, you're going to start working on extending your passport, right? So based on the country in which you're coming from, find out if you can start renewing your passport 1 year or 2 years before it expires. Some embassies allow you to extend it 2 years before, some will say 1 year. So find out so that you can begin that process. So you can sort of timeline, how long it's going to take to process your new passport. So you have enough time to extend your study permit. But when you arrive in Canada, we'll walk you through all that process.
Okay. Thank you very much. Another question we have is, do I need to carry the latest bank statements or the bank statements that I used when applying for the visa?
I would say both because, they want to see that you still have enough funds to still support yourself in Canada, right? Because if the bank statement is submitted with your application and that was processed about 6 months ago, then it's outdated, right? You want to have new financial documents to demonstrate to the officer that you still have enough funds to support yourself.
Another question we have is, can I know what are the common nonverbal cues in a Canadian conversation and how they are normally interpreted?
I don't think I could answer that question because every scenario is different, right? I could have an interaction with you, or you could have an interaction with my colleague, and it would be totally different. So I don't think I have a definite answer that one fit all for that.
Another question we have is, in the event that my medical exam is expired as I travel to Canada, how would I proceed with this situation?
So usually IRCC would ask you if you need to have medicals redone. But if medicals are valid for 1 year, so if the processing time has already passed and it took you 1 year to get into Canada, it's always a good idea to have updated medicals that is valid before you get to that point of entry.
Yeah.
So I'll suggest you get a new one done.
Sounds good. Another question we have is, do I need to change the field of study in my study permit if I switch my major?
No, you don't need to. What the key here is that York University is written as the designated learning institution for your study permit. That is important, right? So if you applied to a different institution and you're approved your study permit, that means that institution has been tied to that study permit, which means you need to apply for a new study permit to have York University reflected on that study permit. So program is different. You can be accepted into, let's say, Lausanne School of Engineering, and then you come to York University and, you wanted to change to LAPS, which is Liberal Arts and Professional Studies, right? It's just a program change. It's okay because it's still York University. York University is the designated learning institution on that study permit, which is fine. I hope that answers that question.
I'm pretty sure it will. And a quick reminder to everyone in the webinar that if you'd like to refer back to the presentation that Gilbert gave or the slides that Gilbert has for any information, you can always visit the York International website and you can receive the PDF version of the slides as well as rewatch the recording of the webinar at your best convenience. And thank you very much, everyone, for all those amazing questions. And we will now be taking a look at a few of our upcoming webinars. And thank you for once again, Gilbert, for your presentation as well as answering the questions. And once again, another small reminder that you may continue to use the Q&A feature for this portion of the webinar, and the questions will be addressed towards the end. Okay. We actually have one of the most exciting event coming up and probably the very, very first event that you will attend during your time at York. And I am talking about the very special International and Exchange Student Orientation. But before I talk more about it, we'll watch a quick short video that a group of YI student staff here compiled together for you folks.
Excited to start your adventure at York?
Join us for the International and Exchange Student Orientation and discover all the amazing opportunities waiting for you. Our orientation sessions are designed to give you a strong start, learn about the university health insurance plan, and get vital immigration information. Understanding immigration requirements and your health insurance plan can be daunting. That's why we offer you the chance to meet our advisors directly, ask questions, and get the clarity you need to focus on your studies. Worried about setting up in a new country? We've got you covered. The service fair connects you with essential service providers to help you transition smoothly into the Canadian life. Set up your bank account, choose your ideal phone plan, and discover services that support your success as a York student. To truly feel at home, you will need to explore every corner.
Get to know your new home with our guided campus tours. Discover where your classes are, explore study spots, and get insider tips from the students who know the campus best.
Need essentials? Join our shopping trip. Stock up on everything you need with transportation provided by York International. But most importantly, it's about the people you meet.
Orientation is about more than just information. It's your chance to meet fellow students and build lasting friendships. Join fun activities, share your experiences, and become part of a diverse and welcoming community. Your journey at York University starts right here. Welcome to a place where you will grow, achieve, and create unforgettable memories.
Welcome home.
Okay, I'm pretty sure you folks have seen the video, and you can probably tell it's a very fun and exciting program that we have lined up for you. And this program essentially is based there to help you adjust to life here at York University. And we have planned a variety of activities and sessions for you. We have a service fair, we have a campus tour, and we have our very own shopping trip, so that you folks can purchase any items that you need to buy. And if you'd like to be part of this fun-filled event, feel free to click the link that has been placed in the chat. And I will in fact give you a few more seconds to scan the QR code on your screen, which will take you directly to our registration website, so that you can register for orientation. Okay, 5 more seconds, and I'm hoping everyone has registered by now. Okay, here we also understand that you may not be able to make it on January 4th, which is the date for the main orientation, because you may have delayed visas or any other unseen circumstances. And we actually have an alternate day orientation for you folks. So for those of you arriving after January 4th, we have an upcoming alternate day orientation on January 17th, 2025, which will be held at York Lanes. And the orientation will cover the same program as the main orientation. However, it will not be including the service fair or the shopping trip on this day. I would suggest that you folks click the link in the chat or scan the QR code, whichever is best convenient, and simply bookmark this link to your browser in case any unexpected situations come up and you're not able to attend the January 4th event. You have the alternate day orientation lined up for you in order to catch up on what you've missed. Here we have our YI events calendar that can tell you about the dates and times of other webinars and events that we have coming up. And you'll also actually be able to register for these events directly from the events calendar. And I'd also like to mention that Gilbert highlighted the events calendar for advising sessions, whether this is in-person advising sessions or the drop-in sessions. So this is your go-to point for registering for different types of advising, different types of webinars, different types of events. So I'd highly recommend that you folks bookmark this as for your browser. Before we wrap up today's webinar, we'd like to encourage everyone to stay connected with us through our social media channels. And by following us, you'll receive important updates, event announcements, as well as opportunities to engage with your community. And before we end today's webinar, I'll take a quick look at the Q&A to see if we have any last-minute questions. And we do indeed have a few questions. So Gilbert, I'll start off with the first question, which mentions that I'll be joining the Schulich School of Business for the winter exchange this coming semester, and I was told that I do not require a study permit. May I know if the letter of introduction is still required?
So you'll be joining the School of Continuing Studies. So if your program is more than 6 months, you need a study permit. If the program is less than 6 months, then they're right. You don't need a study permit to study in that program. So you can always join the virtual in case you still need more clarification. We can talk about that in details.
Okay. And once again, Gilbert mentioned about the virtual drop-in. We do have the link placed in the chat for the virtual drop-in, and we also have it tomorrow. So it's a very good, convenient time for you. Another question we have is, how can I check if my program is eligible for co-op or internships?
So typically, I said co-op doesn't start in your first year. So most labs, like some programs, engineering programs would be eligible for co-op in your second year. So you just have to speak to your program department, and then they're going to issue you a co-op letter. You're going to come see us. We're going to walk you through the process of how to apply for a co-op work permit. It is free. It is very straightforward, but we'll walk you through the process and the documents you need to apply for the co-op if you're interested in co-op being part of your program.
I'll just ask a bit of a follow-up question to that. You mentioned engineering as the co-op platform. Is there any other faculties that you're aware of that offer the co-op and internship?
So most of the faculties of a co-op program, you just need to speak to them, and then it has to be tied to your program. So when you get here, just speak to your faculty. Majority of the faculty I know offer co-op programs.
Okay, sounds good. I hope this clarifies any of your doubts. And since we have no more questions, I'd like to say thank you all very much for attending today's webinar. I hope you're able to understand more about arriving at Canada, and we're looking forward to seeing you at our future webinars and events, especially orientation. See you everyone. Bye.